It was a hot day on July 2nd, 1863, as Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain received his orders to defend Little Round Top. It was the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Chamberlain, a college professor from Maine, was now in command of the 20th Regiment of Volunteers from his home state. And they were assigned the far left position of the Union line with orders to hold the line at all costs. Now the enemy attacked and was repelled in wave after wave. And as the Confederate soldiers regrouped for one final assault, Joshua Chamberlain gathered his officers for a quick meeting. Casualties had been heavy. The line could now be defended only sparsely at best. And then he discovered that even by ransacking ammunition from the wounded and the dead, that there was not enough to hold off another attack. Retreat was not an option. And so he made a quick and fateful decision. The 20th Regiment would attack. After hastily instructing his officers on the logistics, the time had come as the enemy approached. "Bayonets!" he shouted, and the order to charge was not even necessary as his brave men instinctively sprung from their cover to meet the advancing enemy. The weary Confederates were caught by surprise at the courage and the unexpected charge, and they quickly retreated. And this skirmish turned the tide of the battle and ultimately the war. Now, centuries earlier, another Joshua, identified in scriptures as the son of Nun, also faced threatening circumstances and intimidating armies. And so God spoke to him. And he said this in Joshua 1:6, "Be strong, be courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have good success wherever you go. And this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you'll make your way prosperous, and then you'll have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Well, let's take a closer look at Joshua just for a little bit. The Joshua, the son of Nun, not Joshua Chamberlain, okay? Although he's my favorite Civil War hero, some of the things that he did, and I think there's things we can learn from his experience. But let's look at Joshua in the scriptures. Born in Egypt during the time of the Hebrew bondage. Now his name, did a little bit of digging here, his original name, Hoshea, meant salvation. But Moses called him simply Joshua in Numbers 13. The English name Joshua, now this is interesting, is a rendering of the Hebrew language Yehoshua, meaning Yahweh is salvation or God is salvation. Now, Jesus, the English derivative of the Greek transliteration of Yeshua via Latin. So, Joshua and Jesus basically are similar, pretty much the same, okay? Most likely, Joshua, who's, again, his name means Yahweh is salvation. He was probably, when he was in Egypt, was trained in the military arts. How do we know this? Well, he had the skills necessary to lead the fight against the Amalekites shortly after crossing the Red Sea. And this battle was the first mention of Joshua in Exodus 17. So he had some pretty sharp military skills. Guessing he got that probably in Egypt as he was trained. Numbers 11:28 mentions that Joshua was an attendant of Moses from his youth. How would you like to have Moses as your mentor? Yeah, I think that might be a little intimidating, as well as, wow. But he was an attendant or a disciple of Moses from when he was very young. What else significantly did he do? What was he selected for? Do you remember? Yeah, he was one of the 12 spies into the land of Canaan. And he and one of his compadres, who was whom? Caleb. Joshua and Caleb are the only ones that gave a good report. You remember that little song? What is it? 10 were bad and 2 were good, or something like that. A little kid song we used to sing. The 10 other spies. Oh yeah, the land is indeed flowing with milk and honey. But the giants live there in fortified cities, and we cannot take the land. And the whole congregation believed the bad report. And they even said in Numbers 14:4, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Well, number one, they already had a leader, Moses. They wanted to go back to Egypt. Did they forget what life was like there? But they wanted to go back. What's that?
No, they
didn't. They wanted to, they said, but it was not a good choice. Let's read from Numbers 14 about Moses and Aaron. It says, Moses, Aaron, they fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, they tore their clothes. So, I mean, they were upset. That was a sign of mourning and just really being just devastated by what was going on. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, then he'll bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land. Catch that? Don't fear the people of the land. For they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. But the congregation said to stone them with stones. So they listened to the bad report, and then Joshua and Caleb are given the good report and begging them, do this and this, don't rebel against God. And they're like, yeah, let's kill them. I mean, if God had not intervened, Joshua and Caleb would have been stoned right there, killed right on the spot. Speaking up for God sometimes is dangerous. I mean, it could have cost him his life, but God intervened. And you know what happened to the other 10 spies? They died immediately in a plague that was sent. And then the rest of the congregation, what happened to them? 40 years. Anybody 20 and older were condemned to die, wandering for 40 years in the desert. Not a pretty picture. Not a good time in the history of that nation. But after the 40 years, and that generation had died off, a new generation had emerged. Okay? Now, this younger generation, we talk about generations all the time. There's baby boomers, and then there's Gen X, and there's Gen Z, and, millennial. We identify different people. Well, this was a new generation. And this younger generation had wandered in the desert for 40 years, eating dust, having funerals, wandering around because mom and dad and grandma and grandpa did not believe God. And they got stuck wandering around there with that other generation. They suffered for the lack of the faith of their parents. Don't ever think that our decisions that we're islands, and well, I'm just going to do it my own way, and no, it won't affect anybody. Yes, it does affect everybody around you. None of us are islands, and our decisions affect other people. And in this case, the decisions of those that were making the decisions cost that younger generation. They had suffered for the lack of faith of their parents, but now their own faith was strong. They had seen the error of their parents' ways, and now they were ready to follow God into the promised land. And at this point, Moses was nearing the end of his life, and Joshua was appointed as Moses' successor. In Numbers 27, it says, "So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit." How would you like to be known as a person filled with the Spirit? Yeah. It says, "Lay your hands on him and have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation and commission him in their sight." Okay, so this was done publicly. It says, "You shall put some of your authority on him in order that all the congregation of the sons of Israel may obey him." That was an important thing to do. Moses is like, okay, I'm coming to the end. Here's Joshua. He's your new leader. Now, in a few weeks, I'm not saying I'm Moses, and I'm not saying Micah is Joshua, but in a few weeks, Micah's going to be here. And at that time, it's like, whoo, here's some of this responsibility. We're going to pass that mantle. He's going to be our new leader. Okay? And we need to publicly acknowledge that. But this new generation, they were ready to follow. And now they had a new young leader. And then we see some of God's instructions, because after Moses died, think about Joshua at this point. He's been Moses, he's been mentored by him. He's been his disciple. Moses grew old. He died. And now it's time to lead this massive group of people into the promised land. How would you be feeling right now? And you're taking the place of Moses. And you've seen all these sights and wonders that Moses was able to do. And now God says, you're in charge. After Moses died, the Lord told Joshua, be strong and courageous. And we'll get to that in just a little bit of why he did that. But what is courage? Does courage mean you're never afraid?
It means to be brave or bravery.
It means to be brave. It doesn't mean you're never afraid. What's that? Working through your fears. You are exactly right. It's not the absence of fear, but it's being obedient through the fear. Doing the right thing, even though your knees are knocking and you are scared spitless. You still do the right thing. That's courage. It's a choice. It's not just an emotion or a gift. It is a choice we make to be courageous. Webster defines it as firmness of mind and will in the face of danger or extreme difficulty. So, firmness of mind and will in the face of that stuff. So here's the question. Any time in scriptures that you see God or like the Apostle Paul addressing things, if they're addressing something, you have to ask yourself, why did God tell him this? Or why did the Apostle Paul talk to the Corinthians about immorality? Well, apparently it was going on. And he was addressing something. Or the Galatians, they were not doing what they were supposed to. And so he was, and Paul got a little bit upset with them. Oh, foolish Galatians, how quickly you are, led astray. So why did God tell Joshua, be strong and courageous? What do you think?
He needed it.
He needed it, yes. Joshua apparently was a little bit timid at this point. And maybe Joshua was not strong and courageous. Otherwise, why would God tell him to do that? He was a green, untested leader thrust into a difficult position. And he needed those words to spur him on and to strengthen him. Leaders need encouragement. And God directed Moses to encourage Joshua in Deuteronomy 1:38. It says, Joshua the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall enter there, encourage him, for he will cause Israel to inherit it. So Moses was supposed to encourage Joshua. And then when Moses died, God himself stepped in and said, be strong, be courageous. So what was Joshua facing that would cause fear and the need for strength and encouragement? Because why did God tell him to be strong and courageous? Because there were some things coming that he would need the help with. I mean, he was taking over leadership from where Moses left off. And the instructions were, go into the promised land. Well, there was a problem. What was right there? The Jordan River. Not just some little creek that you could just pull your robe up and just wade through. No, this was at flood stage. So everybody on the other side of the Jordan were like, whoo-hoo, we're safe. Because this mysterious Hebrew people are over here on the other side, so we're all right. And yet the instructions were to go. And there's a need to cross the Jordan River. There were fortified cities like Jericho to be conquered as they entered the land. There were giants. The Anakim. No, not Anakin. That's Star Wars. Anakim with an M. There was these giants in the new land. There's the track record of the Israelites. They were always excited to do exactly what God and the leaders wanted them to do, right?
Sure.
Not. They had such a history of grumbling and complaining. And so all these things are facing Joshua. He'd seen those things happen. But we see in Joshua 1:17, just as we obeyed Moses, this is what the people were telling him. If he believed them. Just as we obeyed Moses in all that. What? They just lied right there. Just as we've obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Well, that's not very comforting. But this is the new generation now. It says, only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. And anyone who rebels against your command and does not obey your words in all that you command him shall be put to death. Just you be strong and courageous. Those are some pretty strong words. You go against Joshua, you're dead. Whew. All right. Well, it says that this new generation of Israel, they were faithful under Joshua's leadership. Look at Joshua 24:31. This is interesting. It says, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua and had known the deeds of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Interesting. It was a new generation, and they followed him and were faithful that whole time. And not only through Joshua's life, but you notice what it said there, and through the elders who survived Joshua, his mentees, his disciples, the elders that he trained, they were faithful under those. I think that's key. He must have done some good discipleship to have those elders trained and for God to bless that. Well, there's some other things that are the reasons that Joshua might have reason to fear was the unknown. What's out there? What will be the outcome? You ever sometimes fear a little bit of the unknown? What's going to happen to our culture? What's going to happen in this next election? I've never in my life seen our society so polarized. There's no middle ground anywhere. We're so polarized and we're fighting and we're spiraling, aren't we? That can cause a little bit of fear. And you're bringing a child into this. He always has a remnant, and there's always hope. That's why we need to be courageous and be strong and to fight against some of that stuff. But there's that unknown that sometimes causes that twinge of fear. Joshua felt that. Another thing he had to fear was himself. Would he be up to the task? He had big shoes to fill. Sometimes you may feel like there's a lot on your plate. There's a lot of responsibilities that you're working with. Are you going to be able to do those faithfully, or are you going to fall short? Yeah. Well, Joshua would definitely need to be strong and courageous, and we do as well. So that's how God gave some instructions. Let's look at God's response. Okay, how did God show himself and prove himself to Joshua? This is key here. God exalted Joshua in the eyes of the people. Again, it was a very public thing. Joshua 3:7. Now the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you." And then Joshua 4:14. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, so that they revered him, just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. Joshua could have come up there and led to the best of his ability and done all these marvelous things, but if Moses and God had not exalted him, it would, they wouldn't have followed. I've heard it said that, if you're a leader and you're out front and you're leading and you look behind you and nobody's following, you're just out for a walk. You're not leading anybody. But God had to do something in Joshua's life. So he exalted Joshua in the eyes of people. There was the crossing of the Jordan River. When those priests carrying the ark stepped into the water, the Jordan River stopped flowing and the whole nation crossed on dry ground. Just like Moses and the Red Sea. Y'all believe that? Or are those just like fairy tales and stories and analogies and all that kind of stuff?
Nope, we believe it.
We believe it. Good. I mean, it's in the Bible. That literally happened. The crossing of the Red Sea, the crossing of the Jordan. Those are not fairy tales. Talking about the ark, the instructions were to carry that ark and then step into the water. And then when that first priest's foot went into the water began to part. How would you like to be the first one? And you're at the front of this big box, and you're carrying it, and the other guys behind you are kind of pushing you, and you're like, faith. Or maybe the guys behind you didn't give you a choice. I don't know, but I wouldn't. I'm not sure I'd want to be that first one. But they crossed. They had the victory at Jericho. And these instructions were personally delivered by, quote unquote, the captain of the Lord of hosts. Okay? When he met that guy, as he was doing reconnaissance, and he's just doing his job, and all of a sudden, here's this guy. Oh, are you for us or against us? I mean, this guy must have been pretty intimidating. Okay? By the way, captain of the Lord of hosts, the Lord of hosts, who are we talking about here? All right, Jonathan, lay it on us. Who are we talking about?
It's probably Jesus.
That's what I'm thinking. He is called Lord of hosts. So he is the commander-in-chief of the God army of angels. And the commander-in-chief is standing before him, and he gives him some instructions. And these were some strange marching orders. If you look at it in Joshua 6, 1 through 5. Remember what those orders were? Okay, you go out and you circle once, you don't say a word, and you come back to camp. And then you go out and you do that for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, you circle it 7 times, and then you finally blow the horns and you shout, and then the walls are all going to come crashing down. I would love to have been in the meeting when Joshua told his generals that. And they're looking at him like, Joshua, you have been out in the sun too long. But they followed the orders. And you know what happened? God used those shofars and the voices to bring down mighty walls. Again, not a fairy tale. That happened. How else did God respond? How else did God prove himself to Joshua? Well, the effect of crossing of the Jordan and the victory at Jericho, it strengthened and encouraged Joshua, and also discouraged and demoralized his enemies. If you look in Joshua 2:11, it says, this was Rahab talking. Of course, she helped the spies, covered them when they were in there, and her and her family were spared. But she said, when we heard it, that they were close, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. I'd say she got saved. She was believing in God at this point. The evil kings, it says, now it came about when the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they crossed, that their hearts melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel. They thought they were safe. There's this raging Jordan River. We at least have until, summertime, when it's not flood stage anymore. We at least have some time to kind of get our act together. And all of a sudden, they crossed. A miracle. It dried up and they just came right across. We're toast. And they had no courage anymore. Okay? And then God commanded Joshua. He commanded him to be courageous, but he followed it up with the promise of his presence. Joshua 1:5. He says, just as I've been with Moses, I will be with you, and I will not fail you or forsake you. 1:8. Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. He gave a command, but then he also gave a promise. Isn't that beautiful? Do this, but here's the promise that if you do that, I'm going to be with you. Let's just look for a few other examples of courage. Think about Caleb. He was one of the two old guys. Moses is gone, and there's Joshua and Caleb, and they're the only ones left in that generation that had wandered for 40 years. You ever thought about that? There's these two gray-haired guys, all right, they're so much older. They're going to be the only ones in their 80s because the other guys, 20 or older, died in the wilderness. So the 40 years of wandering, the oldest one would have been 59, while Caleb was in like 85. I know, Tom, you feel that way sometimes, yeah?
I do.
Yeah. You feel old, right? But there's definitely a generation gap there because they all died and they got two old guys. Look at this. They're getting ready to divide up the land. This is after they'd gone in the land. They'd conquered. This is Joshua 14. The land was being divided. So listen to what Caleb had to say. I think this is interesting. It says, now behold, the Lord has let me live. And just as he spoke those 45 years from the time that the Lord spoke his word to Moses, when Israel walked in the wilderness, and now behold, I am 85 years old today. So that kind of gives you a time frame. It says, I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now. For war and for going out and for coming in. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. So first of all, he had the courage to speak up and say, hey, I'm going to go first. I think I've earned the right to go first as one of the two old guys here. But at 85, logic says that Caleb should have entered the promised land and looked for a nice, cushy spot to retire. Wouldn't he? At 85. Some kind of resort community. No. He chose the hill country, the mountains, with giants to be kicked out. It was not handicap accessible, with wheelchair ramps and automatic doors and special parking next to the store and all that kind of stuff. No. There wasn't any of that. There wasn't any AARP or all that kind of stuff for him, or Social Security. At 85, he kept on climbing, and he volunteered for a tough assignment. And I like what it says here about how he followed God. In Numbers 14:24 says, "Now my servant Caleb, because he had a different spirit and has followed me fully." Catch that. He followed God fully. He says, "I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it." You see, Caleb was willing to go against the grain, to swim upstream. You know, any old dead fish can float downstream, but it takes a live one to swim upstream. We know about that with the salmon. When others said there's giants in the land, he said, with God, all things are possible. He was not PC, okay? He wasn't politically correct. He spoke his mind, and he said, this is what God says. He stood up for what he knew was right. He had courage. He stood up to the 10 when they said that it could not be done. He asked for a tough assignment. He drove out the giants from the new land. You can see that in Joshua 15:14. He wouldn't give in to what I call the grasshopper mentality. Remember, they said, oh, the giants, and we're just like grasshoppers in their sight. Oh, me, oh, my. He didn't give in to that thinking. You know, grasshopper mentality. They're all, hopping around, chirping about something, keep you awake at night, small thinking. No, he was like, He viewed giants from the right perspective. If you measure giants against us, the giants are going to intimidate every time. But you measure giants against God, those giants are kind of puny at that point. Nothing to fear. You can tell how big a person is by what it takes to discourage them. But he finished strong. Retire? Hardly. What about us? Are we going to retire from serving the Lord? Gary, you have changed things, but have you retired from serving God? Nope. Probably aren't planning to, I would guess. Things may transition, but as long as there's breath, I'll be doing something to serve the Lord. Caleb reminds me a lot of Dan, his grandfather. There was a picture in the paper, their local newspaper, in Pratt, Kansas. Okay, you probably know where Pratt is. Yep. 84 years old, and it showed him out there hand-splitting wood with an axe and a maul, not with a gas-powered splitter or whatever. He was doing it the way he knew. But he would split the wood. He would be a handyman. He would deliver food, and you ask him, so where are you going? I got to go help these old people. The ones that were in their 50s and 60s. And he's 84. Spiritual giant in word and deed until a brain tumor finally got a hold of him. But he finished strong. He followed God fully. I think of my parents and grandparents, not perfect, but faithful, active in the church, living out their faith, raising the kids to know the Lord. I think of a former deacon in my previous church. At age 80, he received his doctorate degree. And now I think, I talked to him at graduation, I think he's 83, an adjunct professor at Alaska Bible College. He wants to finish strong. I look around here. I'm looking at the face of giants. Okay? Spiritual giants. Men and women who follow God fully and are strong and courageous. And I'm here to tell you, keep it up. Be strong. Be courageous. I think of the Apostle Paul, 2 Timothy 4. He says, I've already been poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. And Paul, like Joshua and Caleb before him, were strong and courageous. He followed God fully and kept the faith. But let me wrap it up. God told Joshua, be strong, be courageous. So, don't answer this out loud, but what are you facing today that causes fear in your heart? Perhaps it's a health crisis, maybe damaged relationships, loss of employment, an uncertain future, maybe a bully at school or at work, financial struggles, loss of a loved one. There's so many things that can cause fear. But I'll tell you, like God told Joshua, be strong. Be courageous. If you need courage, ask God for it. 2 Timothy 1:7 says this, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. So if the fear is beginning to take over, recognize that didn't come from God. He's not giving us that spirit of fear, but one of power and of love and of sound mind. Ephesians 6:10, finally, brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things, not some things, all things through Christ who strengthens me. Remember the things that he's done in the past. And then watch at what he's doing now. 2 Chronicles 20:17, the instructions were, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord who is with you. Sometimes we just got to stand still and look for it. Other times God says, there's the fight. Go. Be strong. Be courageous. 1 John 4:4. Greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. Isn't that a blessed promise? We got the upper hand. You know what? I've read the back of the book, and we win. If you're on Team Jesus, we win. There's going to be some hardship. There's going to be battles to be fought, but we win the war. You know, following God fully, it's hard work. But wouldn't you rather burn out than rust out? If you think about that. Don't just sit around and get rusty, but keep working for the Lord. Wouldn't you rather get out of the shallow end of the pool and go deep with God? Go deep with him. You know, as a church, we got some pretty big tasks ahead of us. Okay? Wouldn't you agree? That we're standing on the threshold of some amazing things. But we got a lot of work to do to see it happen. We have a church that needs to grow, okay? And when I say church, I'm talking about the people. We need to grow numerically. We need to grow spiritually in depth and understanding of God. We also have a church building to build that we can use as a tool to gather for our weekly gatherings and to use it as a ministry and an outreach into our community. We have a new pastor to get used to and to follow. I mean, we got some challenges ahead of us, don't we? Be strong, church. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Follow God fully and keep the faith.